Good morning, YouTube, and today I have for you my first place Yu-Gi-Oh! Day Infernoid deck profile. I'm going to go a little bit more into the details of how my Yu-Gi-Oh! Day went at the end, so stick around for that. But first off, we're just going to power straight through the profile. Beginning with our monsters, we're running 2 Infernoid Onunku and 2 Deviati. Definitely do not run any less than 2. This keeps your Decatron live, your Void Imagination live, and realistically they're your biggest beat sticks of the deck and have the coolest interruptions. But you do run a lot more big dudes and dudettes. You run 1 Atundel, 2 Saitsumas, and 1 Jet. Jet is obviously just there for your feast. Saitsumas and Atundel I can find interchangeable at times. They give you a nice little banishment for the Saitsumas. Atundel itself gives you 2 attacks. Realistically, these are 8 big monsters that you will see hopefully in your opening hand that give you interruption on your opponent's turn, regardless of whether or not you have your field spell, which makes this deck so much better. But in all honesty, you want to see at least one of these in your opening hand, otherwise you're going to be in a world of hurt. But realistically, these are what make the deck so alive. That's not to say that the smaller dudes of 2 Petrula, Harmodic, Antra, and Primus aren't essential to the deck. You want to run a smaller number of these because these can't be banished or brought out and interrupt during your turn, but realistically they each have their own niche. We got spell traps, we got set cards, we got face-up cards, and we got compulsing monsters. In all honesty, these can be considered bricks at times, but are additionally names that you can use to bring out your big dudes and have their own niche effect. In all honesty, I find myself liking Primus more. Most people don't typically run Primus, but it gives you an option for your Void Feast if you're running really low on resources, and honestly isn't too terrible of a card. Your only normal sum of the deck, though, is Infernoid Decatron. A lot of people forget about this. The whole entire deck cannot be normal summoned. The only card in this deck that can be normal summoned is Infernoid Decatron, which makes for some really nice interactions. This card can essentially become any card in your deck with its effects. So in all honesty, and it's level 1 in the deck, but it gains levels later on. This is the key card that you want to hit if your goal is to try and beat the deck, but in the same sense, this is also the best bait card because your opponent has to respond to it, otherwise you're going to end up with a negate or a free banish as a quick effect. Rounding up our monsters, we run a playset of Lava Golem. The reason I run Lava Golem over your Spheres, your Nibirus, your Kaijus is because Lava Golem cannot be normal summoned. The fact is that Monster Gate and Reasoning are very essential and pivotal to this deck, and if you run the Lava Golems, they can just be straight up dumped. In all honesty, a lot of times the 2 interruptions and 2 destructions of your opponent's monsters is all that you will need. So that's why I run that, and there's a playset. And even so, even if you don't run to that thing, these are going to be great side-out options, which sometimes is the most important part of any match. For our Void spells, we run a playset of both Void Vanishment and Imagination. Imagination helps you set up your graveyard, gives you that level manipulation and so you can bring out your links. In all honesty, is one of the cards that makes this deck so amazing and is a free dump. Void Vanishment gives you the ability to search for your Imagination or search for your feast, and gives you a free banishing of a monster that battles with an Infernoid. All in all, great cards. I like the rest of the Void spells and traps, but these are realistically the only 2 that you realistically need for spells. We can't forget, however, the important Layer of Darkness and 1 Terraforming to search it off. Layer of Darkness is what makes this deck so live and able to survive in most formats. The ability to interrupt your opponent by tributing off their cards during their turn with your monsters is absolutely amazing. And sometimes, too, the ability to just banish your opponent's cards from the graveyard is an additional second interruption that makes this card and this deck thrive so much. And of course, the Terraforming is just to search it and to see it as quickly as possible. Next, we run a playset of Monster Gate and 1 Reasoning. Reasoning, I feel, itself can be cut at times, but it's in there for the fact that it gives you ability to dump even more. You run so many different ways of dumping your monsters from your deck to your graveyard, it's not even funny. So realistically, Reasoning is amazing for game 1, but a potential side-out option for game 2, because if you activate it, they're going to know, oh, there's only 1 normal summon in the deck, and it's that 1 monster that you need to dump, that I need to call. But in all honesty, too, you can keep it in there just to set up your graveyard, and that's almost more essential. Monster Gate is absolutely amazing because it interacts with your lair fantastically, and it guarantees you're going to get that monster. So you definitely want to run that as a playset in the deck. Next, run a playset of Pot of Extravagance. Extravagance was a card that I was leery about until I pulled my playset. In all honesty, if you want to bump this card down from the 42 that I have it, and just throw in an upstart, that can be a replacement for Pot of Extravagance. But if you have the ability to play it, definitely do so. The downside being that you kind of have to build your extra deck accordingly, but realistically that's not going to matter for the 2 cards that you can potentially get from your deck. And it's also great hand trap interruption bait. Rounding up our spell lineup, we run Forbidden Droplets and 1 Triple Tactics Talent. This is a very, very weird ratio. And the reason being, first and foremost, is I only have 1 of both. But the second one being is that there's often times where I find that if you have once per turn cards and you have multiple of them in your deck, they're going to brick part of the time. And this can be a pretty bricky deck at times. So running 1 and 1 of these came out in clutch and actually did me some pretty good favors. We can't forget, however, our traps. We run 1 Void Feast, which is the heart and soul of the deck, especially going first, but can actually do some stuff going second as well. For those of you who don't know, you can send a Void spell or trap card that includes itself to the graveyard to special summon Infernoid monsters, and their total levels have to equal up to 8. So most of the time you're going to be special summoning out your Decatron, or 2 Decatrons in this jet, so on and so forth. It's really, really easy to come up with exactly 8. That's not as downside as much as you might think it might be. Running only 1 was something I was hesitant about, but in all actuality, you'll notice when we get to the side deck why I only run it at 1. Infinite Impermanence is my only hand trap per se, just because it doesn't get diminished by the Monster Gate or the Reasoning. And honestly, this is one of the best hand traps in this current format, so that's why I only run it. 42 card main deck. Moving on to our extra deck. We're going to playset of Tierra, a playset of Ents, and Slide from Lord Omega. The reason I lay these out as is because your Tierra is going to be dumping these cards, more than likely. Sometimes you'll be dumping off Link Karibo, but very, very rarely. Tierra itself, for those of you who don't know, you'll only be using one of the first 2 effects. One of them just dumps cards from both players' decks to the graveyard, which is really what you need. And you're going to be using 6 Infernoids to bring it out too, so that sets up your graveyard. The second one being able to dump cards from your extra deck, up to 3. So you're going to be dumping your Ents, more than likely, unless you extravagance them off, then you'll be dumping Tierra. Or if you're trying to just reset your graveyard, you can bring Omega as well. These cards are essential. I very rarely use Omega, so this might be a potential cutting option, but it's nice to have in there, especially if you get into a pinch. Next, we run 1 Link Karibo, 1 Relinquished Anima. These, just keeping in here at 1 and 1, I find myself wanting to bump one of these down and just keep one of them, but in all actuality, Relinquished Anima you can set up with your Lava Golem, so you can steal it, so that's a nice interaction there. Link Karibo is amazing because it can recur itself and gives your opponent self an interaction during your opponent's turn, which can be absolutely amazing. So let me know which one of these you would cut. Then for our Link 2s, we run 1 Beat Cop, 1 Doolittle Chimera, and 1 Hida. The Doolittle Chimera and the Hida, I find myself interchanging often. You can bump one of these up to 2 and dump the other one, but in all honesty, I find their niche situations, just that a little bit of attack boost can help out at times, and stealing stuff your opponent's graveyard is also amazing. Beat Cop, however, is amazing because, number 1, she's generic, so if you have your Layer of Darkness, this is what you're going to be going for. And the amazing thing as well is that all of your monsters will be dark whenever you bring her out with Layer of Darkness, so you can get her additional effect to tribute off a monster, particularly your opponent's, to set up a counter on your Layer of Darkness and give it some protection. All in all, I would like to kind of bump up and add an additional generic Link 2, but these have worked amazingly so far. Rounding up our extra deck, we won 1 Ecomax, 1 Blackluster Soldier, Soldier of Chaos, and 1 Axis Code Talker. If you are a person who fears the luck and the chance, definitely bump up Equimax up to 3. I myself only had 1 when I was testing and looking, so I was like, okay, well, we'll just play 1. I threw in the BLS, the downside being he requires 3 monsters at least, but the plus side being is that you can set him up amazingly with some of your bigger dudes to give him some protection, and is an amazing threat that can be. So if you definitely just want to run 2 Equimax, rather just take out the BLS. Access Code Talker is kind of there and as a cute little tech because it is just so amazing in any format, and I wouldn't really take this one out. You might swap this out for an Appaloosa if you're going for more of a going first build, but Access Code has done amazing work for me. Being as this was a very important Yu-Gi-Oh! Day and competitive, I did run a side deck. We have 2 Void Feasts. This will be essential if you are forced to go first, oftentimes when you're going second, or in the second game, then, or if you choose to go first. Seeing this in your opening hand gives you an automatic 2.5 interruptions if you just see 1 Void Feast and any Void Spell or Trap card. This will automatically give you those, so it's essential to run that in the side deck. 1 Red Reboot, 1 Imperial Order, and Skill Drain. These each obviously control one of the 3 components of the game. You got monsters, spells, and traps. Red Reboot is amazing for heavy trap decks, and the fact that you can activate from your hand is absolutely amazing. Imperial Order and Skill Drain are more of like skill and playing around cards, but they each have their niche effect. Skill Drain itself, I remember, won me a very crucial match. A little bit crazy coming up, we have Back Row Hate, Cosmic Cyclone, and Harpy's Feather Guster. Okay? These itself could probably take care of everything, but if you feel that little bit of an edge that you need, we also run 2 Lightning Storm. These also help take care of monsters, but the downside being is that it has to be in attack position. A lot of people nowadays play cards such as 2 King of All Calamities that they'll play in defense and they'll try and play around the Lightning Storm, so it's not always the best side deck option. Now, if that is your case and you're fearing monsters being put in defense position, we also round up our side deck with 3 Dark Holes and Raigeki. Why so heavy on this destruction? Well, it's kind of a gimmick that I wanted to try in terms of side decking ideas, that you can take care of the 2 main components, the back row and the front row, by just playing these cards and hopefully succeeding. And they did in some pretty good work for me. And that is going to wrap up my first place local Yu-Gi-Oh! Day Infernoid deck profile. My matchups were a DDD deck, Madolche, a Zodiac, and I drew against the Prank Kids, because Prank Kids, let's be honest, they take a long time to play off. All of the players were pretty competent. Obviously, it may not be the most meta locals that you might have gone to, which might have been part of the reason for my success, but I feel like even if I did have some of the other things that we're topping nowadays, this deck would still survive. The wonderful part is that if you don't know what to play, Infernoids are a great option to pick up, because they give you interaction, and the combos aren't nearly as intensive as a lot of the other decks are nowadays. And if your opponent has never played against the deck, they're definitely going to suffer. Realistically, I picked up the deck whenever Grass is Greener was at 3, or a little bit beforehand actually, and I just really had my heyday of it when Grass was at 3. And the deck feels a little bit empty without it, but can still very much survive, as you can tell by the first place. Let me know down in the comment section what changes you would make. Obviously, there's always room for improvement, and I'm open to suggestions of any kind. And people who are watching also want to have some suggestions, so please leave those down there in the comment section. Thank you very much for watching, and have a great day.